So, hi, thanks for joining me. I'm Adriana Hamacher. I'm the founder of Hit Geeks Media and the senior correspondent for Decrypt. And this is a fireside chat I've been looking forward to for a while because on the occasion of Dfinity's Supernova Hackathon, I'm speaking to the inspirational founder of Polychain Capital, and that's Olaf Carlson-Wee. Welcome, Olaf.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very excited.
So you've got a great deal of experience, which kind of belies your looks, I've got to say. You started off at Coinbase as one of their first employees. You were one of the very first crypto-focused VCs. So you were really early to everything, and you must be well into the pulse of what's happening with Web3. So I'd like you first to tell us, if you can, about your journey. And in that context, what advice would you have for the entrepreneurs who are embarking on the global hackathon for the internet computer?
Yes, absolutely. So I first got into Bitcoin in the summer of 2011, and just really went down the rabbit hole, became very immersed in it. I, the next year, wrote my undergraduate thesis on Bitcoin and kind of the long-term implications if we were to see a sort of a separation of money and state, so to speak. Joined Coinbase as the first employee and scaled up my team and that company quite a bit for 3.5 years. Most of that time I was working as the head of risk, working on anti-fraud, security, compliance, things like that. I launched Polychain in 2016 because I saw a huge opportunity to invest in, founders that were building effectively decentralized protocols, not necessarily for-profit businesses. And there was just a huge gap where nobody really knew how to fund somebody building a decentralized protocol. So I launched Polychain and started investing in this category. I followed Dfinity from the very beginning when they kind of first came out in kind of late 2016, early 2017 with some of their early research and early approach, and invested later that year in 2017. And one thing I've always been excited about is how could we actually build more like full web stack type consumer experiences embedded inside blockchains. And so it's taking this beyond DeFi and moving to, applications where not only the underlying, financial logic is embedded inside blockchains, but also the consumer interface. So, the actual web UI. And then, how could we use token incentives to bootstrap network effects outside of liquidity and lending pools like we see in DeFi, but things like social media networks or video games that also have this kind of chicken egg network effect problem that we could potentially solve with token incentives. So I've been, in crypto for a long time and always interested in what's coming next. So just very excited to be here and talk about the future of all this.
It sounds to me from what you're saying then that it's almost not really the sort of financial applications that need to be developed now. It's the consumer facing ones. That's the kind of exciting area now.
Yeah, because if you look at DeFi today, it's very clear there's traction, right? There's over $250 billion deposited in DeFi contracts. And this is, the whole category really only emerged in a very real way in sort of, late 2018, early 2019. So, and it took a while to start really taking off. It really didn't start taking off until mid 2020. So, it's seen precipitous growth in less than 2 years. And so it's clear there's traction. It's clear there's a market there. One of the oddities of it, though, is that all of the web interfaces that interact with those DeFi protocols are still hosted on centralized servers. So, when you want to go interact with a popular DeFi protocol, the actual interface you're using as an average consumer is not decentralized or tamper-proof, and it's not sort of resilient in the way that the underlying DeFi protocol's financial logic is resilient, right? And no single party could sort of alter that logic. So that we have like this nice hybrid today, and I think we've made a lot of progress. But the next step is making the application that the user is consuming also open source, not just the underlying financial logic.
So also basically you can't move things, can you, at the moment? I mean, like, gaming is stuck in silos, so we haven't yet even touched on some of the things that can be done with NFTs. I think you've spoken a little bit about that. That's maybe one of the big things that we should be kind of looking forward to in this year anyway.
Yep. And what I would say to, you asked about entrepreneurs, I would just say focus on pragmatic user needs, right? Build with a user in mind, and make sure that you have an early set of passionate users that really, really want your product. If you can, find that early set of users that want the product, it's quite likely you can scale it to 100 times that number of users. Wow. But I do think it's important to build, with a concrete end user in mind, where you're really solving a problem for them or providing a service that they don't otherwise have access to. So I always am for sort of pragmatism when it comes to founders building in crypto. Just make sure you understand who you're building for and why your architecture or your approach is providing value for that user.
Now, recently on Real Vision, you spoke about the evolution of blockchain that's kind of enabling all these things to be built. And it went from Bitcoin, Ethereum, now we've got the internet computer, Definity. And you highlighted that ICP is not competing with Ethereum. Rather, it's creating a new paradigm where financial logic and first-time web-like logic are embedded into smart contracts. So why is storing data, images, and all of these things directly on the blockchain for the first time revolutionary? Why is that?
So, it's funny. I had this very similar line of questions around when DeFi was emerging, which is, why we already have crypto exchanges. Like, why does it matter to embed an exchange inside a blockchain, right? We already have lending desks. Why do we need lending pools inside blockchains? And it turns out that there's a whole host of reasons why the decentralized architecture is better for the user. One is sort of counterparty risk and trust. So when you're executing a trade in a decentralized exchange, there's pros and cons. In general, the cost is a bit higher because you need all the nodes to validate that trade. But you sort of have high uptime guarantees. For example, your account, so to speak, can't get shut down or frozen because you're interacting directly with the protocol, not with a centralized service provider who may have other interests or maybe doesn't like the way you're using the platform or something like that. So you don't have any of that platform risk. Also, all of the software is open source and replicable, forkable. So you can copy paste all of that logic and extend it. So whatever you like about a particular decentralized exchange or decentralized lending pool, if you have a tweak that you want to make, you can actually copy paste the whole thing and relaunch it with that tweak. What that means is, because you have the ability for any developer in the world to press play and launch a new application, you have an incredible pace of innovation, right? It's all open source. It's really, really accessible. It's hard to go register a company and get regulatory licensure and go out and launch a crypto exchange. Relatively speaking, it's much, much easier to just press play and deploy a decentralized exchange protocol. So the pace of innovation is massive. And there's these other very neat things about it, which, for example, one is that once you log in with your public key as a user, you're sort of logged in forever. And you don't have to do this kind of email password type confirmation. As long as you continue to have access to the funds behind that public key, you can sort of perpetually stay logged into that end service. So it turns your public-private key pair sort of into an online login or identity authentication system, which is pretty neat. So, across all this, there's all of these benefits to DeFi relative to centralized exchanges. I do think over time and like kind of long term, we will see the majority of financial transactions, both inside crypto and in other financial markets, all move to this blockchain-based substrate over time. Like I do think it is the global clearinghouse and sort of global financial layer of the future. I think that most of what I just said about DeFi and the reasons why it has benefits applies basically to what you might refer to as a Web3 application, like a social media network. The pace of innovation is massive. As a user, you can't really get shut out of the system. You can't get, deplatformed. The forkability and interoperability, what people often call composability across applications is massive. So, in social media today, you're sort of siloed in really all these marketplaces, social media applications. For example, my good reputation as an Uber passenger, I can't take to Airbnb and gain a bit of credibility on that platform, right? I have sort of siloed reputation across these platforms. In addition, you don't have good interoperability. So if I click a link inside Twitter, that takes me to YouTube, it's kind of this janky cross application process. And as much as they can, those services are trying to gatekeep and silo all of their end users so that they're not really leaving the underlying platform. In the Web3 context, every platform is, interoperable with every other one. So you get a much more unified experience in the long term. As an end user, it's going to, that interoperability and lack of sort of lock-in from all the underlying platforms, I think has huge implications for what kind of social media experiences of the future look like. I think they're a lot less extractive. I think they benefit the user more than the platform. And I think you get back to a world where creators actually have a good relationship with their platforms. Today, if you talk to anybody whose business is run on Instagram or run on YouTube, they all hate the underlying platforms that they are forced to operate on. The fees are extractive that are charged to those creators, even though the creators are bringing all the value to that platform, other than basically the technology infrastructure, right? Like YouTube is hosting the servers. So if we can move to a world where the servers are hosted inside a blockchain, now we can reward those creators appropriately, which is that, they're really the ones bringing all the value.
So this is a hugely exciting time. It's really a kind of shift, do you think, in one kind of application that people have been focusing on at the moment, DeFi, NFTs, to kind of a whole breadth of services that are going to make it easier for users and that are on-chain. But what do you hope that the dev teams that are working on the internet computer come up with then to advance us towards mainstream adoption? You spoke about low-hanging fruit before. Is it easy to predict what things will take off? You're the guy to ask, right?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's always obvious in hindsight, though. Just things I've been thinking about, for example, take a mobile game, and a simple addictive mobile game, kind of a Farmville or a Candy Crush type game. I think that adding crypto economic incentives to bootstrap your player base and, offer in-game objects that you can sell for real money to other players and are interoperable across this game with your other games that your studio is making. So, if you're a Fnatic Farmville player, when you come onto the next game created by that studio or even by another studio, you can bring, whatever you've earned from that previous game into the next game.
The big game companies, of course, are not really very much on board with this, or are they? Because it sort of strikes me that there's a kind of, NFTs are a very kind of mixed medium for them at the moment. Have they bought into all the advantages that putting gaming on Web3 has, really?
Yeah, I think crypto supports startups, not the incumbent, across everything. You're never going to see the big institutional players, either in tech or in finance, be the early movers. overall they stand to lose. I mean, it's not quite that simple, but net, if they just don't do anything here, it's the startups and outsiders who benefit from this entire new paradigm. So to me, it's a great area to be an entrepreneur in, because you're the big incumbents. I do think long term they're really threatened by this, even if they don't realize it yet, and they're not going to be the early movers here. So this classic question of, what if Google copies my startup? I think is very unlikely in this case. I think you're basically competing. The hard thing is product market fit. If you can find product market fit, you have open ocean to scale in this environment and this landscape. So it's kind of trading off the competition problem for the product market fit problem, which is here it's all unproven and it's all new classes of applications. So it's very hard to tell what will work. You don't have like this really, really clear track record of XYZ type of application working. But in exchange for that trade-off, you're not competing with any of the big corporates. You just sort of have open ocean to scale.
But the idea you said that, with gaming, of being able to move all your stuff from just one game to another, I mean, what gamer wouldn't want to do that, right?
Yeah, I think the end customer wins in the new paradigm. And I think the entrepreneurs and startups win. I think that the incumbents broadly lose.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know you agree with me, because I've had a few interviews where you've said how you appreciate some of the kind of more revolutionary aspects of this technology, of which there are plenty. DAOs last year were one of them. I mean, not revolutionary last year because they actually emerged several years ago, but really, really took off last year. And we're seeing the kind of younger generations really jump on board this. And I've been speaking to artists recently who have been enthusing about NFTs and, how they enable people like, who are versed in visual effects, not just to work for a big corporation, but, to work for themselves, to have their own company. So I'm just wondering if, if you can make a living producing art, if you can work for yourself, whether it's a DAO or the open internet or, self-sovereign corporation, whatever you call it, could this be the way the internet gets recreated?
If they can, we may see a much more shared ownership model where, people who are users of these platforms share in the upside and are partial owners of the platform, right? So if you look at the number of people that use Facebook or Twitter versus the number of people that own that asset, the number of users is dramatically higher than the number of owners. I think in a sort of DAO Web3 future, you see that being a much more tightly coupled number, right? Where maybe half the users are partial owners or something like that, because you're basically subsidizing the early users, but really you might subsidize basically every user by paying them in some form with ownership in the DAO and governance in the underlying platform. So I think we sort of return the capital structure to the average user, and we get the power of large numbers, where instead of $1 billion being coming from 2 or 3, massive ultra high net worth investors, instead you get $1 billion that's, basically 10 million people putting up $100, right? So I do think you transform capitalism a little bit with that sort of fast crowdfunding. We've seen stuff like this with Constitution DAO, right? Where over $40 million was raised, relatively small, commit size on average from the average participant there. And that sort of spontaneous crowdfunding, it's unprecedented. We've never seen something like that before.
Going from DAOs to VCs. Now, you at Polychain and Chris Dixon at Andreessen Horowitz and plenty of other VCs. I mean, you've all backed Definity and the Internet Computer. So just hoping to get from you, what's unique about this particular platform for yourselves? For you in particular, when it's compared to Ethereum or all the other EVM type blockchains there are out there right now?
You know, I think the EVM backwards compatibility has been like a killer mechanism to bootstrap a user base. We saw this with, Binance Smart Chain, with systems like Avalanche. But that said, I do think that it's early in the lifetime of blockchain technologies to sort of say, okay, there's going to be this one standard that's going to last forever. So I really like, these radical experiments, in ways to build a blockchain architecture. So the thing I like about Dfinity is there's just this trade-off up front, which is, okay, we're going to have really, really intense hardware requirements for our node operators. Okay, so when you say that, it goes against some of the original architecture planning for, say, Bitcoin and Ethereum, which broadly is that I should be able to have a MacBook and run a node, right, on my MacBook and participate in validation and consensus. Once you sort of say, what if we could have people that ran more like server racks, more sophisticated hardware level operations? Could we still get a really decentralized network, but wouldn't it be way faster because everybody has connectivity needs, uptime needs, and basically hardware requirements that are more stringent? And so, that's in a really basic sense, and layered on top of that, obviously a bunch of super sophisticated advancements in consensus and cryptography. I think Dfinity just made a very interesting trade-off, which is, okay, let's see what these more advanced node requirements lead to. And what it turns out is it just radically changes what it's possible to embed inside the blockchain, right? So it makes a trade-off, but the trade-off, I think, unlocks like huge new suites of applications. And, I think that it's just very, I think, pragmatic to move kind of down the spectrum. That's sort of a hardware trade-off relative then to performance for the end users. So there's a whole suite of users that I think would rather pay, a penny for a transaction instead of $50. And it would allow them to interact also with more expressive application interfaces that have images, video, etc. Inside, the Dfinity system, versus, you just can't build this stuff in Ethereum. You just can't. It's not like it's slower or more expensive. It's not possible. So unlocking stuff that's possible, and having some like hardware trade-offs to do it, I just think it's a super interesting design space. So everything comes with trade-offs. Ethereum made amazing trade-offs that led to a huge new suite of applications beyond what Bitcoin was capable of. And I think that Dfinity is similarly like a radical reimagining, right? It's a huge step up, in this kind of experimental landscape. It doesn't mean that Ethereum is makes Bitcoin irrelevant, and it doesn't mean Dfinity makes Ethereum irrelevant. They can all coexist at different places alongside this kind of trade-off spectrum. But I am very excited about it because I think a lot of things, you see out there are sort of, they're kind of Ethereum 1.5, or like they're trying to be like a little step up, but they're still caught in the Ethereum framework. I personally am more excited by stuff that's, radical reimagining. It's not just the Litecoin to Ethereum. You know what I mean? It's really the next step.
And that's basically, to wrap things up, what we're expecting all the developers and the entrepreneurs who are taking part in Supernova to be doing, taking this kind of radical next step, right? So, I mean, you just finally, you once said you like those ideas best that almost sound too crazy to be true. I don't know if I'm paraphrasing you properly, but I mean, is that still true? Should these guys then be going out and thinking of ideas that it's almost too much, but it works? Is that the key? What's the final message you'd give to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that when you move to this radical new paradigm, it takes time. I mean, Ethereum launched in 2015. We didn't get the word DeFi for over 3 years. So Ethereum was, summer 2015. We didn't get the word DeFi until fall 2018, right? So it's just to keep in mind that, and then NFTs, they existed in Ethereum, but they really didn't take off in any meaningful way until kind of late 2020, early 2021. So to me, it just, when you have this radical new application framework, it's hard for developers, it's hard for users to wrap their head around what it is and what's possible. But it's up to entrepreneurs to kind of build that stuff. And the early entrepreneurs that believed in DeFi before it was a word and believed in NFTs before it was a trend, those are the entrepreneurs that end up building, massive projects that affect millions of people's lives. So I think it's kind of the right place to build, but it's risky, right? You have to sort of be a futurist. There's no validation yet.
But that's exactly how you got to where you are now, right? I mean, so perhaps that's where we should end things, because I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. I'm really excited if somebody comes up with something that's kind of super radical, super innovationary. And I'd just like to thank you, Olaf Carlson-Wee, for talking to me and sharing some of your thoughts. It's been super interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for the conversation.